Welcome to the True Crime Lounge podcast. I do have a Patreon that you can join for early access to episodes scheduled to come out. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I also have a merch shop for all your true crime gear. With that being said, let's dive into today's episode, shall we? Today we are finishing up our four-part special into the life and death of Marilyn Monroe. Was her death an accident? Was she killed? What do we know? For this part, we're going to be focusing on the public's reaction to her case, public's reaction theories on her tapes in conclusion of this case. The public was very devastated by the death of this iconic actress, with the news of her passing as it made the front page of the newspapers around the world. Ahead of her funeral of the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery on August 8, her ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio, half-sister Bernice Baker, Miracle, and business manager Inez Madison released the following statement that we sincerely hope that many friends of Marilyn will understand. We are deeply appreciative of the desire and her last respects of Marilyn to Marilyn, who we all loved. They continued, and that we hope each person will understand the last rites um the last rites of the must great necessity be private as possible for the final resting of her. Please, all of you, remember to gaze sweet Marilyn and say a prayer for the farewell within that confines your home or your church. How did Marilyn die? Let's talk about the Unheard tapes theories, okay? So Netflix released the Unheard tapes her tapes that reveals the previously unheard recordings around the screen icon. One of one of the most famous movie stars, sex symbols, and pop icons of the 20th century. She seemed to have it all, and according to the general public, beauty, fame, money, and power. But when she suddenly died at the age of 36, everyone was left wondering what happened. Now, as the subject of Netflix documentary A Mystery of Marilyn, The Unheard Tapes, which explores the conspiracy theories and murky circumstances that surround her death decades later. This film uses audio recordings and research from investigative journalist Anthony Summers, as he began in 1982 when the LA County DA's office reopened the investigation. Summers' own investigation resulted in a 650 recorded interview and eventually will lead to 1985 Monroe's biography Goddess, The Secret Life of Marilyn Monroe, which presented new evidence about the circumstances surrounding her death. Diving into her fraught childhood, which was spent in and out of foster homes and depicting the sleazy Hollywood, was exploited around the female talent. It also talks about her relationship with Bobby and JFK as well. According to his interviews with federal operatives and intelligence agencies, that were also apparently concerned that Monroe had forged associations with communist expatriates connected to Cuba's Fidel Castro, to whom she might have been diverging government secrets. The documentary also features recordings of Marilyn throughout, though, in which her love for cinema from a young age became clear. As she says, Jean Harlow was her inspiration. Contributing voices would also include psychiatrist Ralph Greenson and his family actress Jane Russell, filmmakers John Huston and director Billy Wilder. But how did she die exactly? Here's are the theories surrounding Marilyn's death that the film explores. One of them was she died by overdose. In August 1962, an official coroner ruled Marilyn Monroe ultimately untimely death at 36 as she overdosed on possible suicide. Monroe was found unresponsive in her bed next to a bottle of sleeping pills and a telephone off the hook. After the case reopened in 1982, the original findings remained unchanged, with the DA stating that Monroe either took her own life or died accidentally, and the case was closed. Journalist Summers believed that Monroe either died by suicide or from an accidental overdose, but suggests it's possible the FBI investigators cleared her home to remove any indication of her alleged involvement with the Kennedys. There is a possible Kennedys brothers connection. There are many inconsistencies with the time, location, exactly who was at the scene of Monroe's death. According to surveillance expert Rita Wilson, Bobby Kennedy called Monroe on the night of her death, and she claimed that the actress told him to leave her alone. And that Monroe's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, claimed that they found Monroe's body around 3 a.m. over the widow Monroe's publicist, Arthur Jacobs, Natalie Jacobs, say her husband was called with the news that she died around 11 p.m. Now, the documentary also alleges that the FBI investigator arrived at the time shortly after her death and to remove any compromise of the Kennedy brothers. The, let's talk about the unheard tapes of Marilyn Monroe. Other inconsistencies around some of the details was senior FBI agent Jim Doyle's summer of the federal officials arrived long before the police came. Even stranger are the claims from paramedics that called to the scene was a comatose, but revealed when they found her, and they transferred her by ambulance to emergency room in Santa Monica. And they would say, and the ambulance company owner, Walter Schaefer, would say, no, she wasn't dead at home. One of Schaefer's former drivers, Ken Hunter, had been called to Monroe's home the night of the death, and with Schaefer claiming that Monroe was alive when he arrived. Journalist and writer John Sherlock also said that Monroe's psychiatrist Greenson told him that she was died en route to the hospital and she returned back to her home. She died in the ambulance, and they then took her to her house. Law enforcement informant Henry Hall suggests that Monroe's death became a hush-hush matter. The man that was really involved was the boss, and he was the Attorney General of the U.S. So he had the FBI do anything. People that knew what they want Bobby Kennedy's name bought into this because of his brother being the president, and they had done everything they can to hush him up. Despite all the murky circumstances surrounding the death, journalist Summer believes that she died of suicide or an accidental overdose. There is really still so much that is not known about her last moments. With a haunting audio recording of the documentary, and it ends with the true things rarely get into circulation, as it is usually false things. So, what legacy did she leave behind? She is widely considered one of the greatest sex symbols of the 20th century, even 60 years after her passing. She is still highly regarded as the entertainment industry, inspiring movies and documentaries, and her beauty and glamour remains as an important part of pop culture, as apparel, posters, and other merchandise. So you're probably asking, why should we still care about Monroe? Well, despite her ascendance in the film industry, her final years of her home life were marked by personal professional difficulties. Her last movie, The Misfits, was written by her third husband, Miller, as an allegory to their declining relationship, playing a thinly veiled out of the commercial failure. Fox fired Monroe while she was on sick leave in 1962 filming Something's Got to Give. Though she was rehired on the cuffs of her career resurgence at the time of her death in her final interview reveals the delusionment with the whole affair. After page 36, she was found dead in her Brentwood home. Was her death a suicide, accident, cover up, a murder? 60 years later, the exact nature of her demise remains the subject of many spiritual debates. In the case of Marilyn Monroe, people believe that what they want to believe. She lives in fantasies and shimmered in the shine of endless possibilities. We should care about Monroe because of her how much she cared about us, her audience. Her films live as a myth but also remind us as the person she was. I personally love the fact that she had a horrible home life and she literally came from nothing. Like she started it all. Sure, she had multiple marriages, but she became an icon. But that is it for this series. How do you think she died? I want to know.